The goalpost has shifted, but that should have been expected. When it came to this virus, we saw this bandwagon effect among different countries. Government officials placed their countries in these lockdowns and shelter in places. There are some outliers that have gone a different route, such as, Japan, South Korea, and Sweden. But these lockdowns, of course, has derailed entire industries and put people out of work, like 26 million people in the case of the US. For whatever reason, people have a hard time understanding the economic activity, or more so the economy, is interconnected, and it has interconnected parts. And you cannot simply remove what you deem as non-essential and not expect some severe economic kickback. Ironically enough, these economic kickbacks also have health consequences: depression, anxiety, suicide rates, and so forth. But don't expect those that advocate for these lockdowns to ever take responsibility for those, even though they want you to take responsibility for the potential infected in the event that you advocate for these ease of restrictions. But the whole point of the lockdown, especially in America, which was influenced by the IHME model, is to flatten the curve. You've probably heard that term a million times, but I'm afraid that people that use it don't know what it actually means or have conveniently forgotten. As we enter over a month of these lockdowns, all of a sudden people are so concerned about the number of infections and possible deaths from those infections. So they say that you're going to kill them or their grandmother in the event we ease these restrictions and let people be free and take responsibility and precautions or assume the risk. Well, the concept of flatten the curve never had anything to do with actually stopping the number of people that would get infected or even die from it. It had everything to do with slowing the spread so that those infections were spread out over a longer period of time instead of happening all at once. The whole point is to keep the number of people that need the hospital resources under the amount of available hospital resources so that you don't, let's say, overwhelm them. Yet now, as talks of easing restrictions ramp up and people are getting a little antsy, people now are so concerned with the people getting infected altogether. You even have these big brain, economically illiterate doctors like Dr. Emmanuel saying that we have no choice but to wait for a vaccine, living in the quarantine life for even 18 months or as long as 18 months. So why did we go from flatten the curve from stop people getting infected altogether? Is it because you now find the error in the indiscriminate lockdown? We know that the hospitalization and death rates are not the same among all demographics. Clearly, people that are elderly and or have underlying health issues are the ones that are having the most trouble. So it doesn't really make any sense to have everybody of all age and health demographics under the same rules of lockdown. Or is it because you're seeing this influx of nurses on TikTok videos doing these full sort of dance routines? There are people that actually try to reason with these videos, saying that they're just letting off steam. Sure they are. After working these supposed 16-hour shifts nonstop because they're in these war zones. When they get off work or have a break, I'm sure the first thing they think to do is to learn to do a dance routine. Not rest, not eat, but dance. Cut the crap. The reality is that the vast majority of the country is not New York City. Many hospitals are ghost towns, as they've canceled these elective procedures and preventative care appointments and never really got that big wave of Modelo virus related patients. Hell, some hospitals also are adding to the unemployment as they are furloughing workers, such as Lady Ripley's clinic. Or maybe you're changing the post because the antibody study results are being released around the world and they're telling this similar story. That is, that the number of infected is far greater than what the experts initially anticipated. This means that the infected fatality rate is very, very low. Or maybe you're changing the post because you're seeing the experts that are on different ends of this. Some, think that the lockdown is a terrible idea. Some think that we should be building this sort of herd immunity and we're going to create this influx, or more so this spike, because we have all of these lockdowns. Credible scientists such as John Ioannidis thinks that it is indeed time to open back up in some capacity, of course taking those data-driven, let's say, precautions, and that these lockdowns are going to have these catastrophic results if this continues. Look, I think that a lot of people just have egg on their face and they're too embarrassed to admit that as it stands right now, they never got the doom and gloom they anticipated. They are trying to speak it into existence though. Are people dying from this virus? Absolutely. Understanding that this was a huge exaggeration does not mean that you can't take this serious or take precautions. My gripe, for example, has always been the one-size-fits-all approach. Texas, for example, though more populated than New York State, is having completely different experiences right now than that of New York State. But I think that government officials and doomsday folk won't ever admit that they got it wrong, and they'll pretend like this is necessary in order to save face or make them seem important. Keep in mind that without the doomsday, there are far less heroes and far less virtues to signal. This also, or is also, why some of the people actually want Sweden to fail, which is odd. You've probably seen so many articles and charts highlighting how, let's say, they have more deaths than the surrounding countries. But the number of deaths alone is dishonest to point out. Remember, this was about flattening the curve. The number of infected was always going to be the number of infected. So the only thing that actually matters when it comes to Sweden in this regard is whether or not their hospitals are holding up. And as it stands, though having far less restrictions than many other countries, their hospitals are holding up relatively fine. This is where I'm at. I, of course, was always going to have issue with these lockdowns, considering I'm a libertarian. I think that you should be free to quarantine, of course, but you don't have the right to force others to quarantine. A pandemic does not change this. This was a risk that every individual, though, already assumed long before this virus existed. We long accepted that humans pass germs to each other, and if the wrong person got them, they may have a severe reaction. Viral pneumonia, for example, has existed and killed elderly people, and if it isn't associated with influenza, there is no current cure. Yet we didn't derail entire industries to combat this. There is no agree to disagree. The difference between my position and those like myself, or more so from those that want these forced lockdowns, is that I'm not wanting to force my personal ideals onto you. And I don't want you to have to be forced to agree with what I prefer that you do. Easing the restrictions does not mean that you would be forced to go outside. You want others to be forced, though, to do what you want them to do, even if it means collapsing their businesses and revenue streams. The false dichotomies are just those. False dichotomies. Nobody is forced to choose between government-imposed lockdowns and killing grandmas. But I find it interesting that you fools moved the post and went from flatten the curve, which was meant to slow the spread, to now wanting to end the spread altogether. Very sneaky.